All right, thanks everybody for coming through. My name is Jonathan and I'm the director here at Vela Projects. We're a young gallery we opened just over a year ago, and since then we've had a number of exhibitions. We've really focused on solo exhibitions by young or younger artists, but we also have a real interest in historical South African art and the history of art in the country. And so we've done a previous historical show pairing Peter Clark and Robert Hodgins' work, and now this is the second. Samson's work I've really loved for a number of years now, and I was very sad to learn of his passing in 2022. Unfortunately, I never had the chance to meet him. But this show is a culmination of really a year of working with his partner and family, and we're very proud to be the first solo exhibition of his work after he passed away. We have a fantastic panel who's joining us. Ashraf is an art writer and a critic, and has worked with Samson previously, curating his final solo exhibition while he was alive at 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘪𝘏. It was called Man of the Hour. Also joining us are Dineo Mnisi and Canon Hersey. Dineo, Samson's daughter, and Canon, an artist who was a long-time collaborator of Samson. They're on video call, and I'll bring them up in a second. So let me just bring them up really quickly. Hi Dineo, hi Canon.
Hello.
How are you? Can you hear us fine?
How are you?
All right. I also asked Fred Scott, who's art dealer, art professional, scholar, curator from Joburg, who worked with Samson in the sort of late 2000s. He curated a seminal solo exhibition of Samson's work called White City at the University of Johannesburg, and knew Samson over a number of years. And so I asked him to contribute something towards the panel. He wrote a short introduction, or a short address. It's a page and a half, and I hope that I could read it as an introduction to Samson, his work and his life. So from Fred Scott. Good day, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm unfortunately not able to participate in today's discussion and appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts in celebrating the extraordinary legacy of Samson Mnisi, an artist whose remarkable journey and work have left an indelible mark on the world of contemporary South African art. Born in 1971 in Lesotho, Samson Mnisi was an artist of profound vision and creativity. During his teenage years in Soweto, Johannesburg, Samson Mnisi honed his streetwise skills to navigate the dangers of the notorious White City township where his parents lived. During the period, Samson's talent for drawing became apparent, and this talent was put to good use during his school days, when he guided fellow pupils on how to draw objects for science projects. Having studied fine art and photography at Fuba Academy for Arts in Joburg, he went on to develop an artistic language that was uniquely his own, bold, abstract, and deeply rooted in his cultural heritage. His work, known across the globe, transcended traditional boundaries of artistic expression, exploring the complexities of human emotion and the spiritual connections that bind us all. We cannot overlook the poignant timing of his final exhibition, curated by Ashraf, titled Man of the Hour. I had the privilege of attending its opening on the 6th of October 2022, an event that in hindsight felt both celebratory and deeply significant. The very next day, Samson passed away. His departure, though sudden, seemed to mirror the profound awareness and spiritual depth that characterized his life and work. Samson had excellent observation skills, and his path to abstraction was shaped by life experiences and the cultural wealth he inherited from his grandmothers, who were sangomas. These traditional healers, through their rituals and symbolic practices, deeply influenced his artistic approach. Samson once said, My art is a symbolic language of an abstract thought. Indeed, his canvases resonate with the lines, patterns, and symbols reminiscent of Sangoma rituals, embodying a spiritual alchemy that connects the ancestral with the contemporary. In choosing abstraction, Samson embraced a creative challenge to evoke emotion and meaning without the recognizable images often associated with traditional art. He relied instead on the power of color, form, and symbolic gestures, drawing on his spiritual heritage to create a visual language that was both innovative and deeply personal. He believed in art as a transformative force, stating, and I quote, "I see myself as part of the timeless tradition of celebrating human godliness. From the first rock painting to the present time and beyond, I am interested in using art as another element of alchemy, where through it you can evoke and heal certain emotions." Personally, my interpretation of Samson's creative elements mirrors that of Jean-Michel Basquiat. Both artists possessed an inborn talent of a different order. Mnisi directed his imagination into African ritual practices, while Basquiat engaged with the myths and realities of the American dream, both its promises and its failings. These two artists had totally different styles, yet they shared a rare ability to convey profound emotion and meaning through abstract symbolic language, which transcends the boundaries of culture and geography. Samson's legacy is one of courage, innovation, and connection. His art invites us to see beyond the surface, to feel, reflect, and perhaps even to heal. As we explore his work today, let us honor the man behind the art, a visionary whose spirit continues to inspire and resonate beyond his time. In his absence, I thank Fred Scott for that contribution. Just a quick question for all of our panelists. I wanted to ask if you could each in turn briefly describe your relationship with Samson and maybe give us one or two moments that particularly stood out to you or felt reflective of your time together and how you knew him. Dineo, perhaps we can start with you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dineo Mnisi. I'm the daughter to Samson Mnisi. Of course, it's a father-daughter relationship, but I've always felt like our relationship has always been, deeper, more than just any father and daughter relationship. Till this day, I feel like I was the most understood by him than I am by anybody else. One thing I won't forget, one thing he used to say, and I never used to understand, and it will come up again, is he used to call himself an interdimensional space traveler. I never used to understand that, and I used to be so confused about that until spending time with him in his most recent years.
Thanks, Dineo. Canon, could you say something for us?
Sure. I met Samson at the home of Sholto Ainsley, who is Bill Ainsley's son, who is a painter and an educator in New York. And he was exhibiting at the Museum for African Art. This was 1999 or 2000. And he just had such an amazing flame of energy and inspiration, and he was always ambitious to make more art. And so the first night we met, he was like, "I'm leaving in 2 days, but I need to make some prints. Where can we find a big press?" And I grew up in the arts like Dineo, so my father had a press and was a painter and was a printmaker. So I said, "We have a press." He said, "I need a big press." And I said, "We have the biggest," and he said, "Okay." So we ran to the store the next morning, gathered paper and inks, material, went upstate and printed all night, 12 hours, 12 prints, amazing monoprints, and brought them back to the city and sold all of them to the Museum for African Art. One day, all sold, and he got on the plane with a pocket full of money. And he called us a couple of weeks later, 10 days later from home, and said, you need to come to Johannesburg. Let's keep going. This is a good thing we got here. And so my father and I said, yes, we're coming, we're coming. And we came to Johannesburg, and we stayed at the Johannesburg Art Foundation, which is the first school that had black teachers for white students in South Africa. The Johannesburg Art Foundation in Saxonwald at that time, that Bill Ainsley and Fika Ainsley had helped start, with people like 𝘩𝘩𝘦𝘮, and a lot of the legends went through there. And we made a show called Jumpstart 2000, and that exhibition was sort of a building of a bridge. We built a bridge through art between New York and Johannesburg. And art is belief, and art is creation, and art is the opportunity for something better. And I think Samson, as long as I knew him, woke up every day fresh to challenge the difficulties of the day and bring good energy and vision and light into dark places. And it's definitely been hard missing him these last few years since his death, and not having those middle of the night calls, or those first thing in the morning calls, or the chaos and light he brought into the world with art is missed greatly. So yeah, it's good to be here with you all.
Thank you, Canon. Ashraf, you knew Samson later in his life. I think you met, in the last few years. Are there any moments that stood out to you, and how did you get to know him? I'm going to pass you the mic.
I got to know him 3 years ago when I worked for a group called 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘪𝘏, and I'd gone downtown to Johannesburg, and I'd gone to visit all the artists. There were about 26 or so artists in this massive complex. But it was really when I met Samson, and when I saw what it was that he was making, that I realized that there was something really exceptional about this particular painter. And I wanted to learn more about the processes, and to understand at what point, global abstraction interfaced with African law and African culture. And what became interesting to me is that it wasn't simply about the embodiment or the symbolization of what we very generally call African culture, whatever that might mean, because it's such a massive continent with so many different religious beliefs, value systems, aesthetics. So for me, it's trying to see him in a bigger global picture of what made him radical, what made him astonishing. And it had to do with, for me at any rate, with the fact that he understood what Jerry Saltz expressed in his manifesto on abstraction, and said that abstraction is the greatest visionary tool that human beings have ever been able to adopt, apply, use. And it was in that sense, that broader sense of not telling you what meaning is, but situating you in a condition, in a state of feeling that you could interpret your whole life through those moments. So it was that level of intimacy, which is almost psychotropic, that kind of locked me into his world. And the thing was, it wasn't simply about the fact that he's an exceptionally talented painter, but the fact that he was an astonishing human being. For me, it was his warmth, his generosity, his patience, his humility. There was no egocentric mania, none of the atrocities one associates with the Jackson Pollock, for example. Here is a human being who had an incredible sense of tenderness, and I'm always more drawn to tender people than aggressive ones. And for me, he was remarkably gentle, remarkably warm, and he had this gravelly laugh, this way of chuckling. And I remember when I said to him, look, and I said to my team at 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘪𝘏, this is the masterwork, this is the great master in this stable, this is the artist we need to support, and we need to do a massive retrospective. And I suggested this to to Samson, and he said, absolutely. And I said, you know what, I think we should call it the man of the hour, because that's what you are to me. You are this great moment in African art, and particularly in African abstraction. And so we basically took over 3 floors of the Keys Art Mile and over 40 works, in 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. It was an incredible celebration of a person who, in many ways, you see, he was a cult figure, but he was also a figure that never truly managed to succeed in and through his art. This is the tragedy, that he deserved so much more than he got. So he was both a cult and a law, but at the same time, terribly abandoned as a human being. And for me, his ability to maintain that sense of dignity in the midst of ignominy was, for me, the most profound thing. And one very last comment I recall would have been about a week before he passed away. He came to my house in Norwood and called me to come outside, and they had this beautiful work, actually part of the series, which is the last series he painted. And he said, I want you to have this one. What was interesting about that work was that the frame had been broken, and I'd had to repair the frame. And for me, the trace of that brokenness in the back of it is, for me, one of the most gentle, vulnerable, and beautiful moments about the fragility of creating art.
Thanks, Ashraf. Canon, you spent a lot of time with Samson, and you knew him over the course of many years, from early on in his career, later through. But not only did you know him, and not only were you friends, but you collaborated on a number of projects together. We've spoken about some of the international travels, exhibitions that you did together. What was that process like for you, Maybe you can talk about some of the history that you spent together, some of the significant moments, and also what it was like to be in the studio alongside Samson.
Yeah, we started in 1999 and worked extensively together, especially through the 2011, 2010, and then we did a big explosion of energy in 2016 when we brought Not Yet Free to Johannesburg and then to New York. And but some of the big moments were making the opening event of the São Paulo Bienal in Brazil, and working for 6 weeks at the private collection of 𝘍𝘪𝘮, who's on the International Council of MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, and has a private museum in his property. And we were invited to work for 6 weeks making new art there, that then went on to a museum show in New York City at MoCADA, the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporic Arts, which was probably the height of our producing at that moment. The show in Brazil was called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, and we were in relationship, friendship, learning from the legends of Brazilian art. We came from the legends of South African culture and New York art, whether it be 𝘩𝘩𝘠𝘕 or Fikile Magdalena, or in New York, artists like Peter Bradley, who's risen to huge fame now as an African-American painter who was best friends with my father, also painter John Hersey. And we sort of felt like we were being propped up by the art history as the bridge to the future. There's so much beauty in the diversity that we do not admire or celebrate. For my father and for me, the lack of diversity in the major museums is a misrepresentation of the world we live in and all the beauty that surrounds us. And we lose so much of that. We lose so much of each other. And I think for Samson and I, breaking those boundaries, for him as a top African artist to be the opening event of the São Paulo Biennale at the largest private collection in São Paulo as guests, as honored guests, was enormously meaningful for us at that time, to be able to be heralded and then have the work shift back to New York, to be shown in New York City. Hey Fifi, what's going on? And so I think that, we work for those moments as artists, those opportunities to be lifted up by the society and the culture that surrounds us and said, this is the way forward. And I think that Samson was that time and time again, in a political context, I think in a cultural context, in a go get your money context, all these things are related. You can't build culture without financing and capital. And it's a hard battle. And I think that the blend of money, art, creativity, and community is a fast and furious work. And Samson was one of the best I ever knew at, like Ashraf was saying, he made you feel wrapped in his sensitivity despite the chaos that surrounds. And I think that he was a great creator who allowed even racist people to look at his art and say, fuck, that's beautiful, and that's a hard conversation to start. But he was able to start those conversations through his art, And so I think that the art of Samson Mnisi will live for 1,000 years as a representation of this time, and the need for the world to see Africa for what gifts it has to share with the world, not just what can be taken from her. And so I think that those are the realities of the world we live in, and I think, in a moment, Samson and I represented the change that the world was trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also interesting to me, learning about your relationship, Canon. South Africa was obviously isolated for so long, and the moment that you met in the late 90s, all of a sudden the international borders open up. And it's amazing to me that Samson, as a very young artist at the time, had, I think, the experience and the possibility to travel a lot. I think the perspective of that, together with his sense of really being rooted in his upbringing and his culture, is something that really reflects. And Dineo, you were also telling me that you and your father, particularly in the later years, spent a lot of time together, and that, visiting him, you would often spend time in the studio as well. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your understanding of his studio practice, where his art came from, his ideas, his methods, and also if there are any works in the show that you'd like to speak about. Maybe it's a way of targeting that. Oh, we're struggling to hear you.
I'm saying I know we didn't. I'm so sorry, but we people just walked into the studio, right? And I think hearing what you're asking me from 𝘠𝘪𝘯𝘪𝘏, my brother, is actually, as much as it's going to sound great from me, it's going to sound so much better from him. So please give him the mic and make him answer the question.
All right, amazing. 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘏, thanks for coming.
Hello, thank you. My name is 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘏 Mnisi. Yes, Samson is my father. And I guess when it came to his studio and his art practices, his space is always a very spontaneous space where you can't help but be alive with him. Literally, you are in the space with him, and it's a very spontaneous existence. There's no mistakes in that space. There's only being alive. And each and every piece or fabric he touches becomes life. Whether or not it was intentional or unintentional, things can burn, catch fire, and you might think that's a mistake, but that was an intentional expression of his. And that leads him into multiple techniques and multiple textures and all these multiple expressions, especially close to these last series of works. He really was expressing also an urgency of existence, an urgency of that balance. If you can see, they might seem dark, but there's actually this sense of light that breathes through it, this sense of color through the lines and symbolism. He's also reaching and etching for people to understand that there's not just layers of chaos, but through the chaos there's understanding and unfolding and unbecoming, but becoming again. And each and every time he creates work, everybody is a participant. Hence, when people were in his studio, you weren't just an occupant in the space. You were really a part of the work. He made sure that you were part of it. He would tell you, grab something, help me with that, bring me that. Let's put up the work, let's put it on the left, let's put it on the right. And he's someone that also is able to do multiple pieces of works at the same time, because he's able to transmit what doesn't work on one into the next. And it's this fluid motion that doesn't get interrupted by external thought and this external judgment that usually comes in as you're an artist, because people come into the space and you go, how does it look? And they say, I think you should put red. But he wasn't like judged by that. He's like, you think I should put red, but I'm feeling this. And it goes on, boom. And you're like, wow, that was the last thing I would have thought would have worked. Because you can come across the painting, throw a whole red, and it hits 4 paintings. And you're like, what, did you intend to hit all 4? And it's like, don't worry about that. We are going. And he goes, and he grabs the next line into the next line, and he grabs the next line into the next, and he grabs the one blue, and it starts to etch from this blue into that one, but in a different way. It's all different conversations through the same piece. So it's like this trance always. And if you also allow yourself to really become a part of the space without judgment, I think you become a part of the trance. Hence the work is so powerful, because it does transmit this force that forces you to let go of, your previous selves or your previous ideas or these preconceived ideas of who we should be or what we should be or what we are. It allows you to start over and really start unfolding not only yourself but humanity and your own spirituality and your own understanding of your existence. And I think that's the magic of the work. It's not just a plain image that you can consume in 1 hour and leave. It will take you years and years and years, and each and every day you look at the work, I think it should transmit a different emotion, because we experience life differently every day. So the work is alive. The whole magic of the work keeps existing and keeps repeating itself, and that way we're able to share something special than just, I think, a canvas on the wall or just a painting or just an investment. We're sharing our existence, we're sharing real humanity. And I think at the basis of it, as an artist, that was the most important thing for him, is understanding our existence from a root level and not from this overthought, superficial place where we're like, I have to be this person in order to be the right person. What is the right person? I think the right person is someone who can fully be themselves unapologetically and understand what that also means. It also means it's going to come with good and bad, but you accept that you are that person and you're able to balance that. And I think through the work you will constantly see this great conversation and dance between, not necessarily good and bad, but I would say light and dark. Some, conversations between spirituality and the physical being. As you see, some things are more solid than others. Some things are lighter than others. Some things are revealed by taking away. And these are all conversations that you have with yourself in that process. He has them consistently. You can see him going through the trance, and it's a very personal and powerful thing if you get to experience it ever, if you have ever had a chance to. Yes.
Bless you, thank you. Ashraf, I was very excited to hear that, and I've read some of the writing that you've done on Samson before, but I was very excited to hear that there's a new publication coming out of the Arak collection. Mr. Rahman's here with us today. You shared with me a beautiful text that you wrote on Samson's work. Apparently there are 45 pieces in the collection. I'm not sure if they're all in the publication. In thinking about and preparing to write that, also thinking about your experiences with Samson in the past, how have you thought about approaching his work through an art critical and an art historical lens, particularly as you were mentioning with abstraction in South Africa and in an African context?
Well, firstly, yes, I'd like to punt the Arak book, which is being launched tomorrow at Strauss & Co., and there'll be book signings on Saturday. The book's called African Art, the Arak Collection. Now, the place that Samson Mnisi occupies in it is especially important to me because there's a chapter called African Abstraction ? Because abstraction is seen to be the province of 20th century sort of European modernism, seen as a breakthrough and breakout moment. And as Refiloe has pointed out, of course, that idea is very slanted and very restricted because abstraction as a condition is not defined by any specific moment in history. It's about your ability to demystify, defamiliarize, render unknowable what you previously considered to make sense or to be true. So therefore, it's about a radical, what Nietzsche called a radical transvaluation of values, a radical deconstruction of every ideal, every principle, every saving grace that you think will keep you together. So in that sense, what Samson Mnisi embodies for me is probably, in the South African context, the most radical expression of that freedom. And without being too partisan, though I must confess that I am, I rate Samson Mnisi extremely highly, not only on the African continent, but globally. And I think it'll become increasingly important. And as the comment made earlier about Samson Mnisi will live for 1,000 years, I actually firmly believe that to be the case. But it has to be with the fact, to do with the fact that we are living in a radical revisionist moment in which, for example, the art made by women or by black folk are basically being integrated in a revised global canon. There's a realization that these two species, categories of human being have been repressed for centuries. And so in this new revival, people like Samson Mnisi will emerge as particularly profound, and who will completely demystify it, because to just assume that his work is a follow-up on American abstract expressionism is completely to belittle the subtlety and the complexity of the work he does. I always actually associate Samson Mnisi with another great artist from South Africa called 𝘧𝘪𝘦𝘮𝑒𝘪𝑒𝑚𝑒. And this is interesting. He had his studio above 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘥, and he had Brancusi was the godfather of his child, and he worked with Cobra in the Netherlands. But if you look at European modernism, Cobra has been erased from the history of Western art. The fact that he spent more time in Europe than he did in South Africa is all the more baffling, that basically it was South Africa that had to bring him back into the value system. My point is this. There's an insidious condition in which persists, which is the erasure of black life, the prejudicial conception of what its value is, and the lack of understanding of the complex psychology, which Refiloe has pointed out, that is as accessible to the African imagination, and trying to find that place in a greater world at the moment is absolutely paramount, without it being something that becomes a new dogma. Because that's the thing one has to watch for, to find ways in which to hold fast to the grace in an artist. And in a case like Samson Mnisi, that is the key condition. He is about the human condition. He's not about the black condition. He's not about the black male condition. He's not about the condition of oppression and its transfiguration. These are merely sort of substrata of a much more complex thrust, which all great artists at any point in history have possessed, which is the ability to override the constraints that dictate and inform and shape how and why we see them in the way we do. So this is what is so thrilling about the Vela project and this first major retrospective following his death, is that it's to announce to the world, here is an artist who must not only be commodified and branded and fetishized, but here is an artist as part of an integral scene of human evolution and expression. And I'll just leave it at that for now.
Incredible. We don't have much time left, but are there any questions from our audience for any of our panelists? Yes?
Yes, thank you very much for the introductions and things you said, very interesting. Maybe I'm unfamiliar with his works. First, my ignorance, obviously. Maybe one of you, I don't know who, could tell us something about the elements of one of the works that we're seeing here, to clarify the things that you have been telling earlier about.
Ashraf Jamal, do you want to take this?
Okay, I'll take it. I think, thank you for the question. I think the first thing you would have to familiarize yourself with, which happens a lot, is the use of African symbolism, but from a very spiritual perspective. All these lines are all uses of force and conversations of either as above, below, or as within, without. Depending how the symbols are sitting, they will always represent either wholeness, oneness, finding, discovery. These are all series of discovering in oneself, each line sometimes representing a path. Whenever you would see a cross, as he would say, cross-path culture, it's also like a crossroads of one's existence, a crossroads of one's choice of positivity and negativity, but also the cross sometimes representing a positive sign of addition, of conversion, of alchemy, and because he was very well read. So he knew alchemy, he knew symbolism, he knew what triangles meant and what a circle would mean. And this is from the spiritual perspective as a person, but he was able to also make it universal, because a circle universally, I think, does convey wholeness. It does convey oneness. It does convey a full understanding, a full circular oneness of the world too, if you understand it. And that's why these paths either get stopped or get intercepted by other conversations in between. So depending on how, you see, when he takes away, he's revealing what existed before underneath. And this is also a symbolical conversation, because in order to sometimes show what existed before, you cover and then reveal. And then what existed before starts to show up even more than it would normally show up if you just did a white line, because it would just be an addition instead of addition by subtraction, which is also about the human condition, where you add, but your addition also needs to subtract in order to build itself. All these solid, strong lines also speak to one's understanding of solidness, of one's journey, one's path. All of these symbols start to really convey more of a spiritual conversation of humanity and the condition than to be aesthetics. I don't think he ever did something to be aesthetically pleasing. I think no matter how much people might underplay it, everything is intentional. from his human self and from his understanding of his spirituality and ideas of existence. Everything is intentional. Even if he steps on the canvas, he does not feel like that was unintended, because the canvas was placed in a particular place for a particular reason. And he leaves that mark and works around it and starts to build through the same symbolism. This also a conversion of life, a conversion of understanding one is above, one is below, a conversion of man and woman. It's all these conversations of the soul and just humanity and existence. And I think once you start to understand that, he also used a lot of his upbringing from his grandmother, who was a spiritual healer, So those symbols also come into practice. Those particular practices also come through the work. So all the dotting also is a journey, but in dotting. It's not one consistent journey. And depending how the journey partakes, it begins and ends in other places, joined by other particular conversations, whether those conversations were spiritual, physical, or mental. Yes.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other questions? Fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining us. Ashraf, thank you for being here. Same to you, Canon. 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘥, surprise guest. Thank you. Oh, yeah?
It's actually to 𝘧𝘪𝘯𝘪𝘥. Listening to you speak now, and I was thinking about my favorite book on Rothko is by his son, Christopher Rothko. Be interesting to see your thoughts placed on the page in a very deeply felt way, telling the story of your father's life and art.
Yeah, I think we look forward to that, Ken. We'll continue to work together. Thank you everyone for your time this afternoon. We'll be around if you have any more questions for anyone individually. Have a great evening. See you at the Novel.